Hi, Philip Nathan here. In the first video of this series, I gave an overview of these Living Humanism videos, as well as identifying two core principles, which I described as underpinning humanist personal conduct. I also presented some examples of subsidiary principles, which set out some ways in which we can put these core principles into practice. Before moving on to the immensely important, indeed what is the crucial area of discussing how we can put these core principles into practice in our lives, I'm just going to talk in more detail about and provide some justification for our adopting these two fundamental core principles, which underpin other principles that are put forward in the Living Humanism Guide and in these videos. So to start with, I'll state again the core principles as put forward in the Living Humanism Guide. These two core principles are: number one, act to support and promote your own well-being and the well-being of all others. And two, act to reduce pain and suffering for yourself and all others. So why adopt these as core principles for deciding the actions we take in our lives? Why adopt these as principles to underpin our personal conduct and behavior? The answer to these questions is that primarily the goals of supporting well-being and avoiding of pain and suffering are fundamental to our human identity and character, attuning with our deepest personal and social selves and our personal and social interests. These core principles represent our true human priorities, our crucial and fundamental human goals, and they're in tune with and represent our personal and social development and progress as individuals, communities, and societies. And furthermore, they represent the fundamental criteria by which we, in reality, evaluate almost everything we ourselves or others do in our lives. To put that in more concrete terms, of course, we may do many things, if not almost all things in our lives, with the goal of supporting our own well-being and the well-being of others. Be those fundamental things we do, like eating, sleeping, seeking love and friendship, seeking resources of various kinds, seeking work, developing our careers. We join groups and clubs for friendship and to meet our interests, take part in sports, chat with friends over coffee, enjoy entertainment, support our families and friends, pay taxes, work for the good of our communities and societies. We support others and our wider communities in many ways, and much more. And much more, yes, we do much more to support our well-being. And of course, we aim to avoid painful and unpleasant experiences such as illness, disease, poverty, feelings of personal isolation. We aim to avoid rejection by those we know, by our communities and societies. And of course, we try to avoid physical injury, not just for ourselves, but we also aim to support others in avoiding hurt and injury too. And we aim to act as far as we can to avoid such pain and suffering through each of our days and through our lives in general. So seeking well-being for ourselves and others and avoiding pain and suffering are seen as deep and fundamental to our human character and identity. They are a core, essential part of our being human. They steer us through our lives, and moreover, we benefit from an awareness of these fundamental goals and through deliberately accepting and following these core principles. Demonstrating the importance of our search for well-being and our desire to avoid pain and suffering beyond our individual day-to-day lives in our societies and our communities, we of course introduce laws or have local and bigger government policies which are justified by their proponents on the grounds of their improving well-being and reducing pain and suffering, even when perhaps the well-being of all may not be the true objective of such laws. Laws may look at raising or cutting taxes, supporting medical systems, criminalizing certain behaviors, but they're focused on improving well-being. And if we look at history, at the social and moral changes that have taken place, such as changes in attitude to child labor, the abolition of slavery, or in deeper history to the movement from revenge and compensation-based retribution, an eye for an eye perhaps, to more complex law-based systems for dealing with antisocial and criminal acts against others and the community, it's clear to see that underpinning these changes are the twin factors represented by the two core principles, promoting well-being and reducing pain and suffering. Now, at a conscious level, other goals are possible, such as, for example, aiming for survival or placing above all else as primary goals the idea of serving the community of nation, a community or nation. But while these are seen as valid as goals in themselves, and indeed are taken as comprising components of the core principles, in themselves they do not succeed sufficiently as primary life goals. So, for example, while there may be critical moments and circumstances where simply surviving is our primary aim, where what is called our proximal motivation becomes that of simply continuing to live, and maybe for many people globally in certain circumstances, that would be a proximal aim. The fact is that in the vast range of our lives, we wish for more from life than just survival. We wish for a sense of place and belonging. We want loving relationships, companionships. Often we want family, to be cared for. We want laughter, friendship, good music, adventure, entertainment, fun, and much more. Just surviving is not enough for us. Yes, we want to survive, but we want and need much more. And all of that, as well as surviving, is incorporated here under the idea of well-being. Notably, while we do wish, and it's a fundamental of our human character to be social, and we generally wish to help others, in particular those we're close to, while we do wish to serve our communities and will do so, there are generally limits to what we are prepared to do in such service. Of course, we may do anything and give anything to support our children and our families. But while we may perhaps give support to charity and support others, we do not generally give all we have to charity. Even though on rare occasions we may make great sacrifices for others, and we may even be willing to give up our lives for others. And the fact that we do not in general give everything in such a way is significantly because we do value our own well-being as well as the well-being of others. And we do wish, if possible, to avoid our own individual pain and suffering, as well as the pain and suffering for others, in particular, including the pain and suffering of those we're close to and love. And so, given that they are fundamental to our human character and identity, promoting well-being and avoiding pain and suffering are seen as comprising effective principles on which we can and indeed should be determining our thinking and actions in our everyday living. Now, as I'm sure you'll have noticed, a significant element of both core principles is the focus on acting to support well-being and reduce pain and suffering for ourselves and all others. Supporting others, and indeed all others, is seen as being something which not only supports the well-being of those others, but which also generally supports our own well-being. Fundamentally, our human identity and character is both individual and social, with these social and individual facets of our identity overlapping and interacting, and having the potential to lead in the main and optimally to the well-being of all. When we help others locally in our families, communities, societies, and beyond, and think about others and support them through our decisions and actions in our daily lives, as I just said, this is seen as generally not only supporting the well-being of those we help, but also supports our own well-being. So from helping a needy neighbor with a simple task, perhaps giving them a lift to meet friends, helping them with their washing, encouraging others in sporting activity, being sociable with those who are lonely, supporting our friends when they're upset and troubled, to on a wider scale, helping others far away, facing poverty or diseases, through charitable donations or other personal action. These are seen as actions which not only enrich our own lives and give us pleasure and a sense of fulfillment, supporting our own well-being, but they're actions which also create a healthier, happier, and safer context for all of us to live in which people are kind and caring towards each other. The core principles do refer to all others, and this includes those who have behaved reprehensibly in antisocial and indeed in heinous ways. Regarding those who've committed criminal acts which have damaged, hurt, or seriously hurt others, and even with regard to those who've committed appalling acts, it is seen as important to also consider the well-being of these people, and indeed, as far as possible, where this is reasonable, support them. This is an important way to support ourselves, our communities, and societies. This does not mean that such people should retain their liberty and be allowed to commit such anti-social or criminal destructive acts again. Indeed, they must, within the framework of the core principles of supporting our well-being and avoiding pain and reducing pain and suffering, they must, as far as possible, be prevented from repeating such acts. But the principles mean that they should not be treated with cruelty and vengeful violence. And this also means that where possible and reasonable, forgiveness may be expressed where people wish to forgive. And understandably, of course, this may feel impossible for us to do. And it also means that rehabilitation education should be implemented where possible. Again, such an approach being seen as benefiting us all. Crucially, all also refers to those individuals who are members of all races, nations, religious groups, other groups based on other characteristics, refugees, asylum seekers, for example, We're all seen in this living humanism framework as sharing a common humanity, a common human identity. All it's also taken in living humanism as including future generations. Everyone's well-being must be considered and valued. And all to others also includes the necessity of considering and valuing the well-being of other living creatures too, involving a care and concern for all living creatures and for our natural environment. As has already been signaled in this video, this idea of caring for all others does not mean that we have to behave equally towards everyone. For example, it's the way of things, again, a clear and seemingly inevitable part of a human identity and character that, for example, as parents, we will almost always aim to look after and care for our own children first. That we will, for example, care and act first for those close to us, for those whom we love most and are connected to most. But the core principles means that we must take care of our wider community and all others as well, and not downplay or disregard the pain and suffering, the well-being of others further away. We must not downplay the well-being and the pain and suffering of those who might be defined as belonging to different groups. This care for others being an important part of who we are, but also a crucial part of supporting our own well-being and not simply the well-being of others. One further point for this video: why not put happiness or fulfillment as the goal of our living? These are surely of great value in our lives and would make worthy goals. Well, in the view of well-being put forward here, well-being includes all those things which benefit ourselves and others, all those elements, including happiness and fulfillment, that make us better off in the range of ways that is possible. Such components of well-being include things like our having sufficient food and clean water, good education, good health, wealth, a sense of belonging, autonomy and freedom, and of course, happiness and fulfillment. While elements like effective education, good health are easy to see, and it can be clear and easy to understand what we have to do to achieve these, and while it is clearer how to measure our success with these kinds of parameters, happiness, by contrast, is seen here as a generally transient, often momentary feeling, sometimes long-lasting, it has to be said, an internally determined emotional and mental state. Happiness comprises a worthy and highly desirable goal, which is often very difficult to achieve for ourselves, and certainly more difficult to help others achieve. In some cases, it may be impossible to achieve for ourselves and for others. Nevertheless, supporting well-being in all its complexity, while maintaining happiness and fulfillment as desirable component goals of well-being, which we should of course pursue, supporting well-being in the broader sense as expressed here, this pursuit is seen as more realistic and practical to pursue, offering the realistic possibility of a strong level of success and providing us with clear knowledge of when we are falling short. And if we can support and achieve happiness for ourselves and all others too, then that will be great and represent wonderful levels of well-being. I should add here that in our spoken language, we often use the words well-being and happiness as equivalent, and use the word happiness much more frequently than well-being. And I may, in actual use in these videos, and indeed I do this in the guide, the written guide, sometimes use these words interchangeably and indeed together as partners. So there we have it. I've presented to you the core principles set down in the Living Humanism guide and provided what I see as justification for choosing these as core principles, the core principles adopted in this guide and in these videos. If you want more detail on these justifications, then those are contained in part 1 of the Living Humanism guides. Again, if you have thoughts and comments, please write them in the comments section below this video. I'll try and respond to all of these if I can. It would be good to hear your comments and thoughts and suggestions, including those other perspectives that you may have. Now, having discussed the core principles and their justification, we can move on to the next video, in which I'll be discussing what these 2 core principles mean in more specific terms in relation to our daily lives and how they can be implemented, in particular in relation to our more individually focused and more socially focused selves. Thanks for listening and see you soon.